Well, good morning. I think we'll make a quick start. Welcome to our fireside chat this morning, celebrating IDAHOBIT. My name is Evan Karras, and I'll be with you for the next 20 minutes or half an hour as we have a chat about the importance of IDAHOBIT and what we can do as staff for our students and for our fellow employees as well. IDAHOBIT stands for the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia. And it's celebrated annually on May the 17th. I realize we're celebrating it a few days early this year. It's a day dedicated to really raising awareness about the discrimination and the violence faced by some members of the LGBTQ community worldwide. Its aim is to really promote acceptance and inclusion, to promote diversity and equal rights for everyone, regardless of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. IDAHOBIT also gives us an opportunity to reflect on the importance of creating safe, inclusive, supportive environments for our staff and for our students. By acknowledging and addressing homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia, we are trying to nurture, I guess, a culture of respect and equality where everyone can thrive and be their authentic selves without fear of any sort of prejudice, discrimination, or persecution. On that note, I'd like to welcome to the chat Nita Mannering. Nita is our relationship manager at Pride and Diversity, Australia's only not-for-profit employer support program for all aspects of LGBTQ inclusion in the workplace. Pride and Diversity are specialists in HR, organizational change, and workplace diversity dedicated to improving the health and well-being of LGBTQ members and people by reducing exclusion, invisibility, homophobia, and stigma in the workplace. Good morning, Nita.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you so much for having me, Torrens. It's wonderful to be here. As Evan said, my name's Nita. My pronouns are she and her. And I hope today just to have a sort of, informal chat about why the need for LGBTQ inclusion is still so important. I'll be focusing on the workplace, but of course you can apply these principles to any area of your life. And also to empower those on the call to perhaps, take the next step in their allyship to community and give you a few more tips and skills on how to, better support LGBTQ plus people in your lives.
Thanks, Nita. Can you tell us a little bit about what inclusion really means? I know we hear about it quite a lot, and it's one of those terms that unfortunately I think gets bandied around a little bit. What does inclusion mean, and how can we start to promote it and practice it in the workplace?
Yeah, for sure. Well, look, inclusion really involves you taking an active step. So if you could tolerate something or accept something, and they're quite passive terms, you can be aware of something, but it's completely different to be truly inclusive. So if you think, for example, you are hosting a barbecue and you invite a friend who you know to be vegan. So they're going to be the only vegan there, and you're aware of it, right? So you're clearly tolerant, you're still inviting them, and you're probably pretty accepting. You let them know, hey, look, we'll have a few options, but probably best you bring something for yourself. Can't promise that everything's going to be vegan. Or you could be really inclusive and be like, hey, look, I know you're vegan, just bring yourself on whatever you feel like drinking today. There's going to be heaps of options for you. Can't wait to see you. So to be inclusive does require some, thought and action on our behalf, but it means that the minority or marginalized group or person that you're trying to include, they really just seamlessly pretty much feel part of the whole. And even more than that, they feel celebrated and safe to be their whole selves. Oh, I think you're on mute. Oh, Evan, I think you're on mute.
Yes, I am. Sorry. I read somewhere earlier, rookie mistake. I read somewhere earlier that diversity is asking someone to the dance, and inclusion is asking them to dance.
Yeah. And dancing with them, right?
And dancing with them.
Yeah, exactly. No, I have heard that one before. I think another thing I want to mention when it comes to diversity and inclusion, we are, of course, focusing on LGBTQ people today in the spirit of IDAHOBIT, but you can apply these principles to any minority or marginalized group, because all we're talking about really is our behavior, not our beliefs. I can be an ally to, First Nations people. I don't belong to that community, but I can learn more about them and increase my awareness and understanding of their experience, and therefore be a better ally to them. And it's the same with LGBTQ inclusion. I completely understand that in certain cultures, or even just in certain households, people may hold more negative views or unaccepting views of LGBTQ plus people. But we're not here to talk about that. This is about how we work together and learn together, as the case for many of you will be. It's about our behavior and not our beliefs. And we're certainly not trying to change anyone's personally held beliefs and values, because they're important too, and we need to respect those as well. But we do need to treat each other with respect. So really, what we're trying to achieve today is to increase awareness and understanding. Certainly not trying to change anyone's personally held beliefs or values. Probably a timely reminder that the same discrimination or Anti-Discrimination Act that protects people's, religious beliefs and cultural practices protects LGBTQ plus people as well. So we're all protected by that same legislation and that same principle of mutual respect and understanding.
That's very important. How can we, Nita, we've heard you talk about how we can promote inclusion in the workplace, but what are some tips that we can maybe do if we find ourselves in a conversation with someone or hearing something that is non-inclusive, right? Where the language is incorrect. How can we, as staff members, or even whether we're dealing with the staff or whether we're student facing and dealing with students, how can we start to have that conversation and go to that person and say, hey, listen, this is not on.
Yeah. Look, I completely appreciate that when you witness or see, homophobic, biphobic, transphobic behaviors or comments, it can be really quite shocking. And it really, there's a lot of context here because, for example, there could be someone clearly intoxicated screaming on the train, hateful homophobic things, and the way that you react to that could be very, very different to, a snide comment you hear from a colleague sitting next to you in the lunchroom.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
context is everything. I don't ever want anyone to put themselves in danger. Don't ever risk your safety, because I know that at Torrens you have a plethora of reporting options where you can take what you've witnessed and talk about it with someone else. So perhaps I'll let you speak to that, and then I'll jump to sort of what you could do as an individual in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from my point of view, because I face students all the time, we have a lot of students who come from very different cultural backgrounds. And I know that some of our students also, this is going on the behavior, not belief. Some of our students maybe don't understand some of the terminology that we can use. And how do we educate some of those students to understand that it's okay if you don't get it, right? You just have to expect it, accept it. You have to respect it. It's not a matter of completely understanding it necessarily or agreeing. How do you think we can have those conversations?
Yeah, and it's really hard for especially international students and staff where English isn't your first language, and it's very hard to know the difference between what we would call colloquial or kind of slang, which may be offensive, and then the correct terminology for community. So there's definitely a lot of terms out there. I would really encourage you, I know it sounds super basic, but Google is your friend.
Yeah.
To if you especially read something, seen something online, you're not sure what it means, a quick Google will quickly tell you the context of that word, and usually whether it's an insult or not. I think that it's also really great if you in a private setting, you can ask someone who you know to be a strong ally, so therefore pretty educated, So member of the network could be a good example there. Or if you have any friends or colleagues or peers that are LGBTQ, you could just ask them, look, hey, you know, I heard someone say this, not really sure what it means, and I'm not really sure if it was acceptable or not. That's really an okay conversation to have, because it shows that you want to learn more, and that you're increasing your own awareness, you're self-educating. Language in this space is always evolving. I did prepare a slide with some terminology. Perhaps I'll share my screen for a minute
Sure.
and let you have a read as we talk, because everything I'm about to show on screen is completely correct and acceptable terminology that you may come across. But I'm just conscious of not sort of bombarding everyone. So let me just bring that up. And what I'll just explain is that the concepts we're talking about here, so people's sexual orientation, which means who they're, you know, sexually attracted to, and people's gender identity, which is the gender that they feel within themselves, you know, to be true. These things apply to 100% of the human population, right? It's just that, you know, for 89%, roughly, we'll find out when we're included in the census, for about 89%, their sexual orientation will be heterosexual or, you know, straight, and their gender identity will be cisgender, or their gender experience will be cisgender, which means that the sex recorded on their birth certificate matches the gender that they identify as. So I, for example, am cisgender. I've had a cisgender experience. So I have, you know, a little F, F for female on my birth certificate, and I identify as a woman. So the concepts that we're talking about do apply to absolutely everyone. It's just that majority group kind of forget, and then the LGBTQ plus population become othered. All we're talking about here in the LGBTQ plus population is the other 11%. Same ideas, just different definitions. I'm so sorry, I didn't share the slide, did I?
That's okay.
Okay.
You'd get there eventually.
All right, so I hope this is coming through. So let me just skip ahead to where we've got all the words up on the screen. All right. So hopefully what you can see now is a really full and rich list of terms that are used to describe the...
Can't see. Oh, there we go. It's coming up now.
Yeah,
sorry. There we go. It's a bit slow. Yep. Got it.
So what you're seeing up on screen now is, yes, cisgender and heterosexual people are still here, 100%. But we also have the LGBTQ plus population in there as well. So especially, I'd just like to focus for a moment on the blue column, or the second column under gender identity and gender experience. Cisgender, which is the term I just described, which we know would describe my own gender experience, and transgender. These are really important terms that I would love those on the call to learn more about and educate themselves on, if this is new terminology for you, or perhaps, you know, a little bit foreign, because the transgender community is unfortunately experiencing alarmingly high rates of, you know, physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse in the general population, but specifically in the Australian workplace. What we've found from our national survey we run every year here at Pride and Diversity, you know, last year we had 45,000 respondents from all sorts of industries across Australia. And unfortunately, 1 in 5 trans and gender diverse respondents had been bullied at work because of their trans identity. So this pocket of community is really under the microscope right now, so to speak, and are experiencing just elevated instances of everything from, you know, the kind of snide comments or, you know, minor incivilities to actual assault and really serious instances of violence in the community. So within this blue column up on screen here, there are probably some terms that you have heard of. Non-binary, I think, is by and large probably the most commonly used term in Australia. For those who have a trans experience to identify as. So what non-binary means is that the individual does not align with either man or woman. So, you don't, and binary meaning the two. So you don't align with either of the two. The other terms in there like genderqueer, gender fluid, bigender, and agender are all, they all have their nuances, and I'd love you to go and do a little bit more reading and or jump on the Pride and Diversity or the ACON website. So ACON is our parent organisation. I'll pop it in the chat in a moment. But there's some really easy to digest video resources and fact sheets. You can sort of educate yourselves on this more if you wish. But to Evan's point earlier, the key takeaway is just understanding that how people describe themselves and their experience is valid and it's true and it's to be respected. You as an ally don't actually have to know all of this back to front. I mean, look, the more the merrier. Anything I can do to support you in that learning journey, I'm more than happy to help. But you don't have to be an expert. It's more about being respectful. And if someone shares a term with you that you're not familiar with, I mean, kudos to you for being a safe person and someone that they can talk about their experience with. That's great. You're obviously doing your job as an ally. But you can ask. It's okay. If someone in the context of a conversation says, oh, and, I'm bigender, and you, instead of shying away from it, you could just ask, politely and respectfully, like, oh, I haven't heard of that term. Would you mind explaining what that means to you? Those sorts of conversations are really encouraged.
Is it okay to ask? Sorry to cut you off. Is it okay to ask? I mean, if someone doesn't introduce themselves with their pronouns, is it okay to say to someone, what are your pronouns, or how would you like me to? Is that an okay conversation to have?
Yeah, 100%. I find that I like to always introduce mine and then say, can I ask what your pronouns are? So
Okay.
for example, I made a new friend on the weekend, and I asked them, oh, hey, look, sorry, I forgot to ask when we first met, but I use she, her pronouns. What are yours? And kind of just got it out of the way and moved on, with the relationship. So I would just, it is kind of a bit of a personal thing. So I wouldn't ask it in front of a group or point someone out and be like, what are your pronouns, But definitely ask people. And, if they kind of look at you like, like it's kind of not a big deal and that it's not really that important to them, that's cool as well. At least then But it's always better to be inclusive, especially in the workplace, or moving into the workplace as you finish your studies, to have these conversations. And the earlier the better. This is why I love pronouns in email signatures and Teams and Zoom, because from the very first introduction, like I have kind of an unusual name, which often prior to having pronouns in my email signature, sometimes people would think they were speaking to someone of a different gender identity, like they just, I don't know, they just didn't know who they were talking to. But it helps paint a picture of who's on the other end of that communication if you're just sharing them up front.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I like to share my pronouns on Zoom. Unfortunately, we can't quite share them on Teams at the moment with work, but I know that our HR team and our IT team are working together. I've just seen a comment in the chat. I hope you don't mind me just diverting quickly, that Lauren has also said that she's also flagged this with our IT team. So have I, Lauren. So I think if the more of us flag it, then we're probably more likely to get it across. Thank you. But I just want to bring you just quickly, before we go back to our questions, Lauren's made an interesting comment a little bit earlier that I'll share with you. She's just saying Nita, I think it's also important to say that there are people that don't put a label on themselves. For
Yeah.
example, Lauren non-binary, but doesn't identify as cisgender or transgender. So you can sort of be agnostic about some of these terms also.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I think the key is that we respect everyone's, you know, personal, like the language they use for themselves.
Yes,
It's not my place to impose any labels or any assumptions on any other human. I can really only speak to my own experience, right? I've only ever walked in
of
my
course.
own shoes. I was going to stop sharing the screen now, if that's okay, just so I
That's
can
fine.
bring it back to the chat. But
Yeah,
if for those watching, I'll just give you a moment. If you'd like to take a little snip of this or a screen grab, please do so. And I can always share it with Evan at the end of the call as well. But just if there's
thanks.
anything on here thinking, oh, actually, I want to look more into that, now's your chance.
Great. Thanks,
I'll
Nita.
just stop sharing and
So
bring
Nita,
it.
tell us how, I mean, we ask this question a lot, and I'm always interested to find out different people's perspectives, but how can we raise awareness for LGBTQ people and why? Why do we need to do it?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's funny how I think, especially since marriage equality, the marriage plebiscite came through in 2017, that many people hold the false belief that, well, you've got it all now, right? It's just,
Yeah,
it's equal. And that,
literally, that's the
yeah,
case.
like,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
that's not the case. I mean, religious freedoms aside, like we know that you could be fired, a cleaner in a Catholic school could be fired for being openly gay, for example.
Yeah.
Like there is still complications between, religious freedoms and LGBTQ freedoms. And like IDAHOBIT itself is celebrated on May 17th because it marks the day in 1990, which was not that long ago, that homosexuality was removed from the list of diseases by the World Health Organization. So that's kind of what we're here to celebrate. Like it wasn't that long ago that homosexuality was considered an illness. And up until 1997, like Tasmania was the last state to
Mhm.
decriminalize homosexuality in Australia. It's not that long ago. So the sort of prejudices and biases and stigma that LGBTQ plus people faced embodied in law, yes, up until more recently, that still lingers. We can't, you don't remove stigma and bias and discrimination overnight. So unfortunately, and so I spoke to some of these statistics a little bit earlier, but trans folk in particular experience just horrifically high instances of violence compared to the general population. And it's not because they're trans, it's because of the way the rest of society views trans people. And even in the workplace, 1 in 5 trans and gender diverse people are experiencing bullying and harassment. 1 in 10 people of diverse sexuality, so lesbian, gay, bisexual people, because of their sexuality. And, I'll put a little asterisk next to these data points because the companies that we survey at Pride in Diversity are Pride in Diversity members, meaning they probably do give a bit more of a rats than most employers.
Yep.
Anything, we're looking at the cream of the crop. This is not census data. Like I would, I shudder to think what the data would be if we were to actually survey all industries across Australia. And also, if you think about it, being LGBTQ does still carry its risks. There are certain, let's say, for example, you are in a same-sex relationship and you get engaged. Yes, that is legal in Australia. But you
Yep.
start planning your wedding, and it's a pretty short list of countries that you could visit on your honeymoon. There are
Yeah.
a lot of countries where it is still illegal. In some, it's punishable by death, which is just horrific. And even celebrating your engagement, a straight person could definitely walk into the office and look at the ring and, oh, I popped the question, and that would be met with unchallenged celebration. But unfortunately for LGBTQ plus folk, that's not always the case. And you are still met with people's, sort of personal opinions and views and judgments and biases.
It's funny you say that because I'm going through that right now. So I got engaged last year, and and I struggled. We struggled to find a jeweler that would take us seriously, looking at
Oh,
rings. So even, I mean, this is a brand new, like it's not something which is, sorry, it's not a brand new problem. It's something which is still going on. So even in Adelaide, which is not the most liberal city in the country, but it's certainly not the most conservative either.
yeah.
We struggled. We went to many, many jeweler shops before we actually got treated as a couple who were getting married who wanted to buy rings. Every
Yeah.
store we went into, we were just, oh, really? The two of you? And that's what we faced,
Yeah.
And this is 6 months ago, so it's not like it's
Yeah.
horrible. So still, and we're having the same issues now with finding venues. It hasn't gone away. Like it's still very prevalent.
There's just that misconception. And it's also the way, and Lauren has made a really great comment, calling you out here, Lauren, twice in a row now. But if you don't mind me reading it out, that Lauren's also just pointed out that even if you live in a progressive country or area, there are still areas within that are less accepting than others. Living in, and this may only kind of make sense to Sydney-siders who are on the call, but I currently live in the eastern suburbs, very close to the city, very close to like Oxford Street, which I'm sure even those who aren't from Sydney, it's the Mardi Gras parade route. I work at Acon. I'm like, basically wrapped up in rainbows. But when I first moved to Sydney, I lived way out west in Mount Druitt, which is just a
The
complete,
opposite. It's always the opposite, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah. And people would call out like slurs like, bag and leso and
Yeah.
things like that, hang out of vehicles and scream at you. And I know that can happen everywhere, but the prevalence was that much higher and the visible signs of inclusivity were absolutely non-existent.
Mm.
There was not any sort of welcome here stickers. There was no one sharing pronouns. There was nothing. It was invisible. The LGBTQ plus people, while I'm sure they were there, were completely invisible. And that's, within the same city, which is still one of the safest ones in the world, but
In the world, yeah.
that's the kind of unique challenges and barriers that LGBTQ plus people have to consider that heterosexual cisgender people just don't. That's where the privilege comes in, right? So for cisgender heterosexual people, you can just be out and open about those key aspects of your identity from day dot without any discrimination. And LGBTQ plus people unfortunately don't always have that same privilege. That's what IDAHOBIT is about. That's what LGBTQ plus inclusion is about, and why I have a job is because there is still work to do in this area.
So going on from that, Nita, how can homophobia play out or translate in the workplace? Like how does it work?
Yeah, look,
What are some examples? Yeah.
Yeah, look, I do think that in Australia we are more protected by law, which is great. But what it means is that often homophobia and transphobia and biphobia can be really quite insidious and sneaky and more understated. I'm not saying awful things don't happen, and violent things don't happen, because they do. But what we see most in the workplace is things like career progression being stalled because of your identity, or fear of your career progression being stalled. Workplace incivility, like jokes, innuendo, people using a lot of Australian language is quite homophobic in particular.
Definitely.
I
Yeah.
mean, words like, homo, or that's so gay, or fag, or poor. People use that just in conversation, not necessarily directed at an individual. But when you use derogatory language like that as part of a casual sentence, it does not make community members feel safe at all. Like, we shouldn't be the butt of the jokes. Why is saying that's so gay? Why is that used as an insult or as a negative? In my world, it's a big compliment. It sounds like it's
Yeah,
probably a good
absolutely.
time. So that's what it can look like. It can also look like and this can probably fall a little more under people being ignorant or a lack of awareness and education, but making assumptions about people's sexual orientation or gender identity based on how they look. You know, how you dress, or if you recall the previous slide, your gender expression, that's just how you like to turn up. You know, that has no, you can't be making assumptions of the number of piercings people have in their ear, or you know, their makeup or their clothing. You can't make assumptions about who they're sexually attracted to, you know, or their gender experience based on these things. So it can be like misgendering people, so using the wrong pronouns for individuals. That's a really common one, and this is why I love having conversations about pronouns. Once you know, like, you may make oh, my lights have gone off. Sorry. Like, you know, you may make mistakes. It's very hard to undo decades of, you know, she, her, he, him language. Like, I understand. But the more we talk about it, the more we practice. Like, we're smart cookies. You know, I know Torrens,
Yeah.
you know, pumps out some pretty smart people. So, like, you will get better at it 100%. Practice does make perfect. And another really sort of worrying thing that happens in the workplace is like people being basically, you know, excluded from certain activities. Like, there may be support for parents, for example, that same-sex or LGBTQ parents don't feel welcome in. There may be those sorts of supports that don't feel as accessible to LGBTQ plus people. And also things like sporting activities or extracurricular activities that can often be quite gendered, and maybe typically masculine or typically female, that then people feel excluded from. So I think it's just really important to be mindful that with that inclusive hat on, that there's really nothing at, you know, at Torrens or at Pride and Diversity or at any employer or institution around Australia that can't be, you know, with a bit of thought, you know, and adjustments, can be inclusive of everyone.
How can we call it out? Is it okay to call it out? Is it okay to say to someone, I'm not comfortable with that joke? How can we have that conversation? Because it can be
Yeah,
very difficult. I mean, it's actually, you know, quite
absolutely.
confronting for some people, you know.
And I think I digressed from what I was saying earlier about context and went off on a tangent, but
That's okay.
I think if you're comfortable, something along the lines of like you said, you know, hey, like, you know, you can't really say that, or that's, you know, that's outdated terminology. We have better language now. Or you can say something like, listen, you know, I know you were trying to be funny, but actually that can be pretty harmful. Like one that got pulled up recently, I was in a meeting and someone used the term retarded, and it was, in the moment, I was just like, hey, look, totally know what you mean. Like, I know what you're getting at, but we've got better language. It's quite harmful to people who have a disability. Could you just be more mindful to use another term next time? And the person was a bit embarrassed, but we just moved on, you know.
Yeah.
It is okay to have those little conversations with people. And I get pulled up on it too. Like, I've you know, accidentally misgendered colleagues before, and then, you know, someone will jump in and be like, oh, they, and I'm like, and then correct myself and move on. So, you know, I'm not sort of another one that I'm terrible at is always using the term guys, which is very gendered,
Yes.
obviously.
Yeah.
I've gotten so much better since I started working here. But when I started at Acon only a year ago, I had never considered that guys was a gendered term. Like it, and someone's like, well, obviously, like, how many guys have you slept with? And I'm like, yeah, I'm not picturing any other gender, am I? Like,
Yeah.
it's definitely talking about men. And then, you know, if you're labeling a group of people guys, that's not inclusive. So, you know, we've all, like, it's not going to be like you're an overnight expert. That's okay. I don't want you to feel overwhelmed or anything like that. But you yourself, having heard this conversation, and for many of you, you're probably already on this journey, model with inclusive language. And then if you do hear people being non-inclusive, if you can call it out, that's great. But for example, if you heard a manager or maybe a lecturer, someone senior to you, saying something non-inclusive, you might not feel comfortable calling it out. That's where you lean on the reporting options of Torrens, which I know you could talk to your Pride network, who can also engage me. Like if there has to, I do help with mediation. It could just be an education piece, like, hey, I don't think this individual is aware that that's not really the right term we use. And that can all be, taken off you. Like, you don't have to bear the burden of, correcting or educating people if you don't feel safe to do so. But there is also, like bullying and harassment policy at Torrens, which can be employed if you feel like you've witnessed something more serious or more malicious.
I think the hey guys is probably the most difficult for me. And I know that if, I'm just watching the chat as you're talking, and a few of the members have also said that that is quite difficult, but it is also very gendered. I'm finding it. I think we had this conversation about a year ago, Nita, where you mentioned this, and I hadn't even thought of it. I just
Yeah.
kept using it. Emails, hey guys. And it wasn't until you raised it with me a year ago. It's can be difficult to break out of. I mean, I am breaking out of it, but it is because it's just an instinctive thing that
Oh,
sometimes we say.
absolutely. And, we have, well, I've been around for like 32 years, and I've been using a lot of these terms for most of my life. So I'm bound to slip back into old habits here and there, but it does, you do, definitely get better at it. And sometimes I think, how, for example, I think of my grandpa, for example, and he uses some terms which are absolutely horrible. And even though I'm pretty sure he's never going to change, I always make the effort to call out when he uses, whether it be racist or sexist or homophobic comments. He drops them into conversation like it's nothing. That was the norm for his generation.
Of course.
But
Yeah.
I still, even knowing that he may never change, I still make the effort to be like, Pa, please don't say that. Use this term. Pa, that's not the correct term. Can you please say this? Because you just never know who's listening. Like if we're in a cafe environment, for example, and Pa drops a slur, there could be someone at the next table who belongs to that community who's really affected. So by calling it out, I'm still showing my active allyship for whichever minority or marginalized group is being targeted. And I am broadening the definition here because it isn't just for LGBTQ slurs. You could call out harmful and hateful behavior in regards to anyone using these strategies.
Thanks, Nita. And a few of the team are talking in the conversation about using things like hi everyone or hi team
Yes,
instead of
yeah.
using hey
We've
guys,
just
which
got
is
other
very inclusive.
words,
Yeah,
we've
just
got other
stuff.
words.
Yes, we do have a lot of other words. Yeah. So thank
Yeah.
you for the suggestions. We're running out of time, so I'm going to ask you one more quick question. We've sort of covered it, but I really just I want to have you have the final say. How can we be better allies to the community? What can we do?
So number one, and this is reflected in the survey data I've called out a few times, number one is to call out homophobic, transphobic, biphobic comments and behaviors when they happen. That is the most effective. And to do that when LGBTQ plus people are not present, so doing it when we're not in the room is so powerful because people learn better from peers. So our allies, I cannot stress enough the power and influence you have to spread the good word and educate the wider community. Secondly, would be to be more visible. So, I mean, I hope it hasn't been annoying, but you can hear me rattling with all my pins and my lanyard, but it doesn't have to be a lanyard, but having a pin, having something in your Teams or your Zoom, as Evan's got here, sharing pronouns, or maybe having a little banner or something in your email signature is really great. Visible signs of inclusivity could be, a little flag on your desk, or you might have on the back of your laptop or Surface Pro, like some stickers. We have them here at Acon, so let us know if you'd like to order some. But you can have ally stickers or rainbow stickers or whatever, so that when you're sitting in a meeting or in a classroom, the back of your laptop is basically advertising that you're a safe place for community.
It's a great idea.
And then the final one is just try and get a little bit more queer content in your lives. Like if you haven't already, maybe follow some accounts on Instagram. LinkedIn's fantastic. I would obviously be plugging Pride and Diversity here. But you can just follow a few pages and news articles and fun facts and days of significance and things like this will just come to you organically, and you'll be amazed how much you learn. Pretty much like it'll just be dropped on your doorstep. And that's how you can just increase your awareness naturally about the LGBTQ plus community.
Fantastic. If we have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat box. But if not, I just want to remind the staff here as well. We are working very diligently on developing a Pride collective or a Pride network here at Torrens University. We've had different iterations of the past. Nita has been absolutely fantastic and helpful in getting things started. So Kelly Cairns, the amazing campus director based here in Adelaide, and I have been trying very hard to get this off the ground. We are growing. I will put some information. We're going to send out some stuff to everyone who came today, to all the invitees, just a little booklets that we've put together, and also some information about how to follow the page on the My Torrens website. You can probably find it. It's just called Pride at the moment. It's a little bit, we're working on making it a bit more, a bit brighter and a bit more colorful, and updating it a bit more often. But please follow it and keep abreast of what's going on. We'll be trying to plug as much stuff as we're doing on campus, either on our campuses for our students or for our staff members. Will be all on our Pride Collective page. We hope to grow it. And if you want to join, please, by all means, we would love to have more people come along to our meetings. If there are no questions, Nita, thank you so much for coming along. It's always wonderful. You and I always talk for a long time. So thank you so much for coming along. We really, really do appreciate your time. And thank you all to the staff as well who have come along. It's very happy to have you here supporting us. And learning more about what IDAHOBIT means. Thank you very much.
I'll just pop my email in the chat as well, because there were a few questions that I think may have gotten buried in the chat.
Of
so
course.
if you would like to contact me directly, team, please do so. I'm more than happy to answer your questions offline.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming, and we'll hopefully see you soon. Thank you very much. Thanks, Nita. Bye-bye.